take it or leave it deals. So I understand full well the pain that independent pharmacies uh, have gone through with little to no checks and balances on PBMs. So with their frustration, decided, hey, we're going to do something different. We're going to try to be a good actor here and do it the right way and not take advantage of those who don't have the knowledge or information that we have access to. And some of those kind of deceptive practices that PBMs employ, we're going to talk about here today. And it'll be just enough that hopefully this webinar will serve as a launching pad for you to go out and get more information to help your company, whether you're a broker or a consultant, or we have some self-funded employers here today as well. Right, so that's the intent today. You're not going to learn enough here to be a world beater. It's too complicated over the course of a 40-minute webinar to become an expert. You can't even become an expert in this if you do 20 RFPs a year. It's not enough, right? So let's go ahead and get into the webinar for today. If you have questions for me, there's a couple ways you can get those to me. You can send them to me via the chat option on your GoToTraining control panel, or you can raise your hand, at which point I will unmute you. Everyone's muted for obvious reasons. No one wants to hear dogs barking in the background or kids or cars passing by, right? So you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you, and then we can have a dialogue at that point. There's been a lot in the news lately. More recently, the FTC launching essentially what equates into an investigation into PBMs and their practices. And we're going to talk about that here today. And by the way, I'm not an advocate for legislation to rein in PBMs. I believe with education, we can do it ourselves. And so by the end of this presentation, I want you to know how PBMs make money. And I want you to feel something. Without emotion, there's not going to be any action. And the action that I'm going to want you to take is to begin to solve what we believe is the primary problem in the industry. A lot of talk is around price, right? It's around price. But the real big problem is information asymmetry. Information asymmetry, it's an economic phrase. It's a theory in economics. It says when one party has access to information that another party doesn't have access to, the party with the information and the better knowledge to interpret the information uses it to its advantage. That's what PBMs have been doing, leveraging information asymmetry to charge too high of a price. And so here's what this equates to. And I forget who said this. I think it was the CEO of Black & Decker, one of those cats. And someone said to him, well, all you guys do is you sell hammers and nails. No. And he said, no, we sell holes in walls, because that's the end result of what we sell. Right? So the issue isn't necessarily the price. It is what's driving higher prices, and it is information asymmetry. Here's a perfect example. And I love sharing this information that comes into me, and I can share it with the world, obviously, redacting personal information. And by the way, the director of compensation and benefits here, who entered into this agreement, presides over a firm, over a company with over 30,000 employees, not just lives, employees. They entered into an agreement with a PBM, whether it's direct or indirect through a broker, whatever, that does not permit them to get access to their own claims data. Game over. It's almost meaningless what the guarantees were in the contract, because if you allow this, I can only imagine all the hidden cash flows built into the contract. That is what? Increasing the price of the pharmacy benefit. This is an example of information symmetry, right? This is an example of information success, if you will. PBMs negotiate rebates or refunds with manufacturers. The purpose of those rebates, those refunds, and they come in a myriad of names, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. But the point of rebates is not to bring money back into HR to hire, buy equipment, or whatever. The primary point of rebates is to get to lowest net cost. Most plan sponsors aren't receiving receipts for the rebate payments that PBMs are winning from manufacturers. I'm not talking about some sort of remittance that says, for retail 30 brands, here's what we're paying you. For retail 90 brands, here's what we're paying you. For mail order brands, here's what we're paying you. For specialty drugs, here's what we're paying you. Even worse than that, some companies receive just a single line item for rebates. Here's what we're paying you, and it's not even broken out by the channel. And the channel, by the way, would be retail 30, retail 90, that's the channel. Without the claim level detail, you can't determine net cost. Furthermore, you have no means to calculate what part of the rebates the PBM is keeping, if any at all. So in this example here, you will see that plan ID, field date, that information has been redacted from this particular slide deck for obvious reasons, privacy. When we pay rebates, this is accompanied with those rebates. In fact, this report is sent before the rebates are deposited to make sure that both we and the client are on the same page. It's fascinating stuff. Could you imagine what you could do with this? Even if you received it from one PBM, if you're a broker or a PBM consultant, if you're receiving claim level detail for rebates for one client, how powerful that could be across your entire client base. If you're an employer and you get this information and you can compile it over 2, 3, 4 quarters and even more to hold the PBM accountable. This brings me to the status quo. And it looks something like this. The PBM has entered into an agreement with its client that calls for an artificially too low administrative fee. The administrative fee in this case would be for the claims processing, call center, an account manager, member portal, a mobile app. These are the sorts of things that are typically included in an administrative fee. Formulary management, these types of things. And now you're starting to see, the PBMs that are just really just, making money one way, a fixed flat fee. They're bundling all the services into that administrative fee. But some PBMs, okay, we're not going to charge you any administrative fee, or we're going to charge you $1 per member per month, or $2 per member per month, or $3.50 per member per month, which is way too low for any PBM to keep the lights on, let alone make payroll, without going to the equity and debt markets. And so when you agree, or your client agrees to that artificially too low administrative fee, and I'm saying anything below, let's call it $6 per paid claim, maybe even $6 per member per month, somewhere in there. No matter the size of the client, somewhere around that $6 per member per month, $6 per paid claim. When it gets below that, the PBM is augmenting that artificially too low admin fee in the back end, primarily through these three buckets. There's several ways within each bucket that a PBM can augment that artificially too low administrative fee. And so the bulk of the remainder of the webinar, I'm going to be talking about these undisclosed cash flows. And at the end, show you what you need to do. Now, be careful here. There are PBMs who say we're pass-through and transparent, and they will even charge for an administrative fee $8 per member per month. And still, if you allow it, because that's what they're thinking, we're going to pass through what you allow us to pass through. If you don't demand true pass-through, with most PBMs, you won't get it, no matter what they say. And the sales staffs are only telling you what they've been told or trained to tell you. Most of them don't have, believe it or not, they themselves are unaware of the hidden cash flows built into their own contracts. I'm not making this up. I'm not. All right. So be careful here. Just because the PBM is charging what amounts to something other than an artificially too low administrative fee, there are PBMs that charge a reasonable administrative fee, a fair administrative fee, to where there shouldn't be any additional cash flows, but then they build hidden cash flows into the contract that supplement that augment that already fair administrative fee, if you permit it. Now, if you don't believe me, here's a source you might want to check out. I'm going to show you two of them. Now, when I started my career with Eli Lilly, here's where the revenues were flowing to the PBMs. Small molecule brand drugs before specialty, right? Before specialty. You got smart, you got sophisticated, you shut that off. And remember, this is when PBMs moved to mandatory mail order. Everyone remembers that. You got wise, you shut that off. Even legislation was written that said, no, you can't do this. And then what did PBMs do? They shifted that lost revenue now to specialty drugs in terms of the rebates. Now that shift, when I say shift, I'm referring to cost shifting. They've shifted the cost now as these profits are being squeezed. Here, getting smaller, and now it's going back out again. Let's call this MBDCs, medical benefit drug claims. And these PBMs who are using undisclosed cash flows to maintain their margins and grow top line revenues, they are feasting off of medical benefit drug claims. Feasting. There's fear almost by purchasers of PBM services, plan sponsors, to even get involved on the medical side where drug claims are being generated in both spreads and rebates. It's the wild, wild west. And so, yes, you must get involved on that side in terms of managing cost. If you leave it up to the PBM, well, I don't have to tell you what's going to happen. So it may sound like I'm bashing PBMs. I'm not. I believe we offer a very valuable service. My issue has been the hidden cash flows to non-fiduciary PBMs. And I got to be honest with you. If we were on a webinar about the oil business, or advertising, or some retail clothing business, or an automobile dealer, that's another story. I went shopping for a car, been shopping for a car, and they want you to pay 20% above markup. Like, what? Right? But I get it. But not in healthcare where people die. No. Not in healthcare where people die. And so let's make sure you understand, and I touched on this system, this model up front, but let me run through it really quickly, because I want to make sure you understand here. And I'm going to be focusing on the PBM industry, and I'm going to touch on the financial flow and the contractual relationship. I'm going to be focusing on everything essentially right of this line from your screen. And so we enter into contracts with pharmacies so that we could have sites from which product can be provided to our plan participants so they get better, so they live longer. So once we build these pharmacy networks, we have to have clients to provide those services to. Those clients are third-party payers and health plans. And by third-party payers, unions, employers of all sizes, coalitions in some cases, cities, counties, states, and if you're a large enough PBM, the federal government, school districts. It's a pretty long list of potential clients for us. Now, once a plan participant is dispensed prescription medication, we reimburse the pharmacies based upon the contracts that we entered into with them for that service. And then we bill the client for those dispensed prescriptions. Now, unless a PBM owns retail pharmacies or owns a mail order pharmacy or a specialty pharmacy, we never take control of the product. We never take control of the product. It is, in fact, you know what? I wouldn't consider it, some consider it a conflict of interest for the PBM to also own, pharmacies. I don't know if there's an argument, a valid one on both sides. But what does it matter if the PBM owns the pharmacies if they've entered into a fiduciary agreement with their clients? They can't leverage it to hide anything. That's why I push education so much. And so once we reimburse that pharmacy for that dispensed prescription, we bill the client for that dispensed prescription. This is when the games start to begin. And there's three problems as you see them there on your screen. They don't jump out at you, but there's three major problems. First, the inflow of cash back to the third-party payer in the form of refunds, or in other words, rebates, is too low. I just showed you two credible sources, and both indicate that 50% of the PBM's profit is coming from the manufacturer. No matter what they say, I'm telling you that 50% of the profit is coming from the manufacturer. I'm going to show you more on that here in a bit. That's the first problem, because remember, the intent of rebates is to what? To get to lowest net cost. So first, when rebates, we're talking about only brand drugs. First thing, the generic dispense rate, you got to be above, or you got to be at or above 90%. If you can get the generic dispense rate at or above 90%, you're halfway home already. You're halfway home already. Even a generic dispense rate of 85 or 86%, forget 80, 81, or 82, but 85 or 86% is bad. For every 1% increase in GDR, a plan realizes a 2.5% reduction in gross pharmacy spend. So a PBM who is generating revenue off of rebates would love a GDR of 82, 83, 84%. That means there's more brands being dispensed, in which the likelihood of them keeping revenue or generating additional revenue is high as a result. So that's the first problem. So the second problem is the reimbursements to the PBM for the prescriptions that were dispensed to the third-party payers member. I'm going to talk about what that's called here in a second. But the third problem, and which doesn't really stick out as much, is look who sits atop this entire system here. You do. You do. But you know the least about how it works. That is a recipe for disaster. That goes back to what I was talking about up front about the primary problem being information asymmetry. So I talked about the second problem, reimbursement to the PBM, being too high. It's referred to as the spread. The spread is the difference between what a PBM reimburses the pharmacy and what it bills its clients. It's not accidental. It's not a billing error. It is intentional. It is the difference between what a PBM reimburses a pharmacy and what it bills its clients. That's the spread. Now, the spread is going to occur. It happens in brand drugs as well, but the spreads and the margins on generics, because there's multiple manufacturers making this product, can be fairly substantial. And so we're going to look at two prices here, AWP and MAC. AWP, artificially inflated, no one pays it. Similar to the sticker price on a new automobile. The maximum allowable cost is closer to the actual acquisition cost, or in other words, what the pharmacy paid to put the product into inventory, but it too is higher than the actual acquisition cost. Because think about it, the pharmacies have to make a profit, right? They have to make a profit. So let's take a look here. And so this is something that we post on our blog every Thursday. We move some drugs in, move other drugs out, just kind of give people an idea of what drugs actually cost to put on the shelf. So let's look at levothyroxine here, 100 microgram tablets, a quantity of 30. Look at the AWP as reported by the manufacturer to Medispan. Let's call it $560 just to keep it even, right? So we got two price benchmarks. Now I'm going to show you how spreads happen. We got AWP here, and let's call it 560. We've got MAC here, 560. Now, let's say you negotiate a discount off of AWP of 85%. It's not uncommon today to see in contracts generic effective rates or the guaranteed performance, discount performance off of AWP for generics, for PBMs. It's not uncommon to see 75%. That is printing money. That is printing money. So let's say that you've negotiated 85%, and 85% off of 560, let's call it 475. That is a 7, not a 2. All right, so now that leaves a bill that will be sent to the plan sponsor by the PBM of $85. That's with, again, an 85% discount off of AWP, which many purchasers of PBM services and their advisors would be happy with. Until you realize what the pharmacy paid to put the product in the inventory. And in this case, that cost is $4. That cost is $4. So in practice, the PBM, the pharmacy has to make money to keep the lights on and pay mortgages and rent and pay employees and insurance and all this good stuff, right? So they've got to make a profit. And I can tell you from being on the PBM side now, and as well having owned a pharmacy, that pharmacists would be ecstatic to receive 100% markup on a prescription drug. They would be ecstatic. They wouldn't hate us if that's what we were all paying. But that's not what happens. Sometimes pharmacists, many times a pharmacy, especially an independent, will take a loss on a generic drug. But let's just say this PBM is generous, pays 100% markup, and throws in a $2 dispensing fee. This PBM is only out of pocket $10. That leaves a $75 spread. Larger PBMs have pricing analysts on staff where it is their job to look for these opportunities. As soon as the ink is dry on the contract, they know what levers they can pull and which ones they can't. That's why you rarely see a PBM lose when they're sued. That's why you rarely see them lose when they are sued. They are pulling levers based upon what you've allowed them to pull. Now, one could argue, well, shoot, what if the generic drug is on the MAC list? Well, let's say that the MAC price is $15. The out of pocket for the PBM doesn't change. Then it's a $5 spread. State of Ohio, unlimited resources, smart people. This was about 3 years ago, and this is still pending. They decided that they were going to pivot. And instead of focusing on discounts and minimum rebate guarantees, they wanted to look at how much money the PBM was making. Remember, when I showed you the problem slide, price is a problem, information asymmetry, PBMs are leveraging it, and then the third piece, the information asymmetry makes it difficult for you to ascertain the PBM's fees, its management fee. What is it charging to be the PBM? It is easier to get away with overcharging when your client doesn't know what you're charging in the first place. The state of Ohio uncovered what the PBM was charging to be the PBM. And when they uncovered it, they almost overnight terminated the contracts. Almost overnight terminated the contracts. So if Greg were here today, to a woman, to a man, what he's really saying here and what he would say to you today, and this is not anecdotal, it wasn't information that they never had before. That's an excuse. It's information that they never demanded before, and it was information where they didn't have the sophistication enough to go out and calculate it and determine it. And so let's get into this here really quick, and I'm going to fly through this stuff because it all starts with the contract. It all starts with the contract, not your spreadsheets, not your claims repricing. Listen, if you know PBM contract language, you could do away with the spreadsheeting. You could, assuming that all, listen, in competitive bidding processes, PBMs are often selected based upon the results of a claims repricing or spreadsheeting without even having looked at the contract, without even evaluated how much transparency the client is getting. Because when the ink is dry on the contract, if that contract doesn't bind the pricing that the PBM has proposed, if it doesn't bind the PBM to that, guess what? So MAC lists, PBMs can have multiple MAC lists. They can have different MAC lists among their clients and different MAC lists among their pharmacies as well. In fact, when I owned the mail order pharmacy, our contracts were across the board. We had some contracts with PBMs that were based upon WAC and others that were based upon AWP. So the employer's MAC list will be less comprehensive and less aggressive than the pharmacy MAC list. What that means is that the employer's MAC list will have fewer generics. Same thing as saying less aggressive. The employer's prices are higher than the MAC prices paid to the pharmacy. That generates, as you know, a spread. Rebates, I talked about it up front. There are many names, and PBMs are only limited, right? They're only limited by the names based upon the transparency built in the contract. So when a PBM sits down with a manufacturer, they first agree on the amount of money the manufacturer is going to pay. And then from there, it's divided into different buckets, right? The PBM then divides it into different buckets: outcomes, rebates, market share, access, formulary, product discount, manufacturer administrative fees, which are different than the administrative fees I talked about up front, but some folks confuse them. They are distinctly different. So the question is that while the PBM may be saying, we're not keeping any of the rebates, which rebate are they not keeping? This was aired publicly about 3.5 years ago. Express Scripts sued this specialty drug manufacturer for rebates that manufacturer Kaleo refused to pay. That manufacturer probably assumed that Express Scripts would never sue because that would mean the information would be public. And Kaleo just didn't think Express Scripts was that arrogant that it would sue and then for everyone, the world, to see how much money it was making. And so you can see here, this administrative fee that you see here, again, this is a manufacturer administrative fee. When PBMs and manufacturers sit down, again, maybe they're going to agree on 4 different rebate types. And then for the most part, the PBM decides, where those dollars are going to go. So if there's 4 different types of rebate names, the manufacturer says we're going to pay $1 million in rebates, hypothetically. Then they say, okay, we're going to put $250,000 in formulary rebates. We're going to put $500,000 in administrative fees. We're going to put $125,000 in market share rebates, and we're going to put another $125,000 in outcomes-based rebates. If your contract does not address and stipulate that any revenue, any and all revenue, including but not limited to, and you fill in the blank, are to go back to the plan sponsor. If that language isn't in your contract, and the PBMs write the language in such a fashion that makes it seem like they're being radically transparent. But if you don't cover any money that a manufacturer pays a PBM could say, well, let's put, instead of 250 here, let's put 500,000 in product discounts. And it's a rebate. It's a rebate. But your contract doesn't address it, so you're not entitled to it. Here again are some more examples. Price protection rebates. What I will say now is, once this lawsuit was aired and third-party payers and health plans saw the amount of money flowing to PBMs for price protection rebates, now PBMs are putting this in their contracts, sometimes referred to as inflation rebates. But all they do is shift it to a different renamed or relabeled rebate. They're only limited by their imagination or by your level of sophistication. Here's outcomes-based rebates. These are major, and they've been happening for 10 years. That essentially say, if a drug doesn't meet an agreed upon metric, say it's type 2 diabetes drug, and the member doesn't achieve a certain A1C, then you either pay back the full amount, manufacturer, or a percentage of the amount. It's a refund. It's a rebate. And in contracts, PBMs are bold enough to say, our client isn't entitled to any of that money. What? We paid for it, but we're not entitled to it? Group purchasing organizations. Let me spend just a few seconds on this. As you get more sophisticated, the PBMs try and stay 5 or more years ahead. And so now on the pharmacy side, on the retail side, where you're closing off now, and you've got PBMs coming into the industry now, winning business away because they're providing more transparency. And these rebate dollars are starting not to flow to non-fiduciary PBMs as heavily. They've shielded themselves now to keep these dollars through group purchasing organizations. Now, as a pharmacy owner, we entered into group purchasing organizations to bring prescription drugs into inventory at a better price point than we would have going out and buying individual. So we got better deals from wholesalers being part of a group purchasing organization, where maybe there were other pharmacies part of that group purchasing organization, or health systems, or insurance companies. We were all kind of bundling our purchasing power together to go to the wholesalers as one entity and say, give us a deal, right? So what PBMs have done, they looked at that model, and by the way, listen, the smartest consultants, they hired the smartest consultants in the world to help them figure out these things. You know who the big consulting firms are. They're on the payroll, okay? They're on the payroll. So what they've done now is formed these GPOs, and now they can go to manufacturers and say, here's all of our purchasing power, all of our clients, make us a deal for rebates, and we're going to charge you 15% of whatever rebates you're willing to pay. The problem with that is that 15% comes out of the amount that the manufacturers are willing to pay instead of it being passed through to the clients. Worse than that, you don't know what that 15% amounts to. That's information asymmetry. And by the way, these are all what you see on your screen, group purchasing organizations. All right, so the bottom line here is price is important. When I talk about price, I'm talking about discounts off of AWP. I'm talking about rebates or manufacturer revenue. Same thing, with the intent of those rebates getting to lowest net cost. Those factors are important. They are. More important is how much is the PBM being paid? What is it keeping in its bank account? Remember, we are hired in large part to negotiate with manufacturers, to negotiate with pharmacy networks. What we negotiate is set in stone. That's set in stone. The tough part now is requiring the PBM to pass on to you whatever it has negotiated. It should not be siphoning off those discounts and keeping it for itself. Imagine throwing your team a lunch every Friday, and you assign one of your teammates to organize this lunch and pay the caterer to make this lunch and to bring it in every day. Imagine that teammate cutting a deal with the caterer saying, if you give me 15% of what we're paying you, I'll make sure that we don't use any other caterer for the next 3 years. Not a better deal for the company, a better deal for themselves. They should be negotiating that for the company and then telling the company, hey, look what I did. If your teammate did that, you would fire them. Because they're using your money to negotiate for themselves without being transparent about it. It's the same thing that non-fiduciary PBMs do. And so, and the issue with that is understanding what the PBM is keeping in its bank account. The beauty, if you will, of this entire system, this entire way that PBMs augment those artificially too low admin fees, is that their take home is hidden there. So everyone talks about, PBMs are adding costs to the supply chain, they're overcharging, and it's true, but they don't know how. Now you do. Now you do. And so let me just back that up really quick. And I've got a few questions that come in. I'm going to try and get to those at the end. So stick around. The best part is coming up. So CVS Health, and the CEO just retired. He saw the writing on the wall. He knew what was coming. The CEO of CVS Health in an earnings call in 2018 said this: we underwrite contracts to overall level of profitability and many levers available to pull, depending on the preferences of the client. In layman's terms, what that means is we're going to make as much money as we can. The amount of money that we make, and when I say we're going to make as much money as we can, it means underwrite contracts. These are not my words. This is public information. These are his words. We underwrite contracts. You notice this? Whenever a PBM is sued because they're overcharged, they're being accused of overcharging or not being transparent. Do you ever notice you can't get past the first sentence from them on their reasoning without the word contract being used? You can't get past the first sentence, yet their clients don't care about the contract until the end of a request for proposal process. And when they do get the contract, you know what they focus on most? The business associates agreement. Where the time is spent. Attorneys can hammer away at that all day. But driving radical transparency requires a trained eye. Pharmacy schools don't teach this stuff. Law schools don't teach this stuff. We do. We underwrite contracts, overall level of profitability, and many levers available to pull, depending on the preferences of our clients. We're going to make as much money as we possibly can. The amount of money that we make is going to ultimately reside on how sophisticated or unsophisticated our clients are. They know it. It's been talk around the water cooler for a couple decades now. They all but make jokes about HR and how little they know about pharmacy benefits. Completely overmatched. Completely overmatched. So I talked about the state of Ohio and how they uncovered $250 million just in spreads. Forget rebates, just in spreads in 1 year. $250 million. I don't. And I talked about being able to look at and calculate how much money the PBM is keeping. This is a formula for that. The difficult part is getting the information you need to calculate it. Everything in green at some point lands in the PBM's bank account. And we've talked about some these today, except DIR fees. I encourage you to go out on the web, look it up. We won't spend any time on that. But cash disperse. Well, let me real quick. Direct, indirect remuneration is when the PBMs go back and bill a pharmacy, you know, a DIR fee, maybe 2% of the cost of a specialty drug, 2.5% the cost of a specialty drug. You know, and the reasoning PBMs give is, you know, these are fees to maintain our network and, you know, stuff like that, right? It's just a hidden revenue source. It's just a hidden revenue source. And it's a fee generated after the claim has been adjudicated. Cash disbursements. When a PBM reimburses a pharmacy, cash disbursement. When a PBM passes through a share of manufacturer revenue or a rebate, cash disbursement. Whatever's left over is the PBM's management fee. It's earnings after cash disbursements. The new path says this. This is the ideal path, where the PBM is contractually obligated to make money just one way, the administrative fee. All its services that it provides and what it believes those services are worth are bundled into the administrative fee. In our contract, we got one fee. Everything is bundled into that fee. MTM, pharmacogenomics, claims processing, account management, member portal, mobile app, step therapy, prior authorization, appeals. It's all in a single freaking fee. And the trade-off now is that the PBM charges a realistic fee. Whether you believe it's too high or too low is less important than the fact that now at least you know how much money the PBM is making. I mean, for goodness sakes. Could you imagine going into the grocery store, having a cart full of groceries, and the cashier rings you up, doesn't give you a receipt? Just charges you whatever they want. Or better yet, a better analogy, you go into the grocery store and there's no prices on anything. All right, so here's the new path. And listen, not every PBM is going to offer a fiduciary standard. We need your help to push for that, right? The more people demand it, the more it'll be commonplace. But if you can't get a fiduciary standard, what you cannot settle for, or what you should not settle for, because there are other options out there, is not knowing what the PBM is going to make. And so if a PBM is going to make, if it's going to make money off spreads, if it's going to make money off rebates, if it's going to make money off dispensing fees, if it's going to make money off administrative fees, you as the purchaser, the hirer of the PBM, should know how much they're making. And so, listen, I don't say things without backing them up. I just don't do it. There's enough cynicism within our industry. When you say something, you got to back it up. And so, real quick, client was brought on, still a client, and in the first year, we reduced their PMPM by what is it, 35 bucks, right? 35 buck drop in per member per month. Earnings after cash disbursements. Here's the problem with this. Prime was charging more than the drugs cost. That $23.12 is all in. Our fee, ingredient costs, all in. Prime was charging to be the PBM. Forget the cost of the drugs. They were charging more to be the PBM than what the drugs cost. Remember what the CEO of CVS Health said. We underwrite contracts to overall profitability, right? So, let me wrap up with this. Okay, let me wrap up with this. You are here, I would say, at the contemplation stage, right? The idea here, if you're pursuing radical transparency, you want to win more clients, right? You're a broker or a consultant, or you're an employer, and you're just fed up, right, with the lack of information that you're getting, the lack of transparency and the cost, and you're just fed up. Here at the preparation stage, you need to modify your behavior, right? We've got the only pharmacy benefits designation in the world. Let me just say it. In the world, that is backed by a major university that offers continuing education to life and health, HR, and pharmacists. There's information on the web about the testimonials, about the education that we're providing in this domain. If you are intending here to modify your behavior and taking action, this is the action to take. And so I'm going to leave you with this here. And by the way, Eli Bro, listen, I'm name dropping here, but I graduated from Michigan State. The School of Business was named after Eli Bro, which I attended. I went through the School of Business, never knowing who this cat was. It wasn't until some years later when I actually started reading books that I picked up his autobiography. This quote was taken out of his autobiography. By the way, he's the only person ever in this country to be a founder of 2 Fortune 500 companies, KB Homes and Sun Life Financial. He did that. So if he believes education is the key, then maybe we're on the right track. I know nothing about automobiles. Went through college in the state of Michigan, the home of automobiles. I know nothing about them other than how to run it through a car wash. But when they break down, I've got to take it into a repair shop. And I know when I go in, I'm overmatched. So what do? Bang my fist on the table, stick my chest out, raise my voice in hopes of intimidating the repairman and not taking me for a ride and not overcharging me. Because I know I don't have the knowledge to challenge him or her back. So what happens inevitably? I deny services that I need and I accept services that I don't. That's what happens. Unless I go into a trusted repair shop, I have to trust them and maybe get lucky, or I take someone in with me who is in fact an expert. I'd rather rely on the expert. Don't be me, hoping to get lucky and trusting what they tell you. Don't be me and sticking your chest out and banging your desk, your hand on the table. These increases are too high, and you're falling short of the performance guarantees, and then they give you some reason on why that's happening, and then limit their exposure. Don't be me sticking your chest out and inevitably getting a worse outcome than you would have if you were in fact the expert. That's my time today. Let me go through here and see a couple questions. Let me stop this recording.